Hi, and welcome back to the Simplicity and Complexity series. I took a little bit of a break in order to launch the podcast. If you haven't seen the podcast or heard it or watched it or read it, you can find that at Omni-Win project.com and or get it on your podcast app wherever you can find it. Go check out the podcast. It is already off to an amazing start, and I hope you enjoy it. But returning to our series, this is the final stretch. We're starting to talk about strategic theme 4, which is the development of the Omnipartial Individual. In case you are just dropping in now, let me take you on a little bit of a recap. This series started in mid-May and started with a discussion on how we can use mediation and other kinds of dialogue and interest-based processes and use them in our political system. Those processes are helpful because they help us engage across differences and they help us develop sustainable and mutually beneficial change and solutions to some of the issues we're dealing with. I then went on to talk about how our political industrial complex, or the whole political system right now, is benefiting by keeping us divided. And it's dysfunctional because it's organizing all of these important and complex issues into simple, digital, yes, no, for, against, us, them choices. And that isn't going to work because we live in a complex reality. And the issues that we're facing are wicked problems, which are basically ongoing issues that have no single answer. I then shared ideas about complex systems theory and polarity thinking and how those can give us a lens and start to grapple with some of the complexity that we're facing. But here's the upshot of the whole series up until now. There are some serious big issues we're facing, and they are going to require some nuanced thinking, and they're going to require ongoing responses, and the future is uncertain. There isn't going to be a final outcome, and no one is going to figure out how to solve any of the issues we're facing on their own. So we're going to have to engage with everyone. That includes the people we don't agree with, the people we don't like, the people we don't trust. And given that we have an unpredictable future and we don't really know what's going to work, and the situation is ambiguous, on top of it, all of these issues that we're facing are serious, they're scary, and they need urgent responses. So that brings us to the importance of developing our own personal capacity to face this situation. So I'm going to kick us off with a quote here, and this one comes from Erich Fromm. "The quest for certainty blocks the search for meaning. Uncertainty is the very condition to impel man to unfold his powers." What I really hear in that is that when we're trying to have a certain simple answer, then we actually won't be able to find meaning. But if we understand uncertainty, then that engages us to bring forward our best capacity. And that is why we need to develop as an individual. So here's the idea. We need to be able to let go of certainty, and we need to step into the reality that the challenges of our political world right now are ambiguous, uncertain, and complex. We need to develop the capacity to communicate across our differences, and we need to realize that we don't have all the answers, and that means that we're going to need one another to move forward. So we're going to have to face the vulnerability of recognizing that each of us are part of the problem, and therefore we're also all responsible for participating in finding the solution. So the fourth strategic theme of the Omni-Win project is omnipartial individual development. Now, there's some big words, so I'll just break it down a little bit. Omnipartial is a term created by Ken Cloak. First episode of the podcast, by the way, is with Ken Cloak. You should go check that out. But omnipartial means a bias or being partial towards the success of everyone. And when I say everyone, I mean everyone. I mean me and you and all those other people and all those other people that we don't know if we know or want the best for them. It means we want the best for the individuals. We want the best for the whole. We want the best for the past and the present and the future. When I talk about individual and individual change, I want to name a couple things. First of all, there's some parts of us that we can change. And these are the things that we're going to have to learn and grow and figure out that they're not working for us, find more options, and then you learn and then change. And there's some parts of us that aren't going to change. And that means that we're going to have to use acceptance and compassion and, harm reduction. Sometimes we'll just have to deal with the fact that we're not good at certain things and just figure out how to make sure that it doesn't have too much of an impact. And the idea of development, of individual development, I just want to say that, personal growth and learning is real. And through psychology and sociology, it seems like we actually go through a pretty standard process as we do it. But overall, I tend to think about individual development as growing in the sense of who you are. And that grows into larger and larger scale. So as a young child or baby, it's all about me. I then kind of grow to understand that I'm part of a family. I grow to understand that I'm part of a community, part of a school, part of a society. Eventually, I recognize I'm part of a nation. Then I become part of a set of nations across the world, international perspective, and eventually I start recognizing that I'm part of the whole biosphere of Earth. And as I keep on going, I start recognizing that I'm just a part of the universe and so forth. And as we grow in that sense of scale, we also grow in our ability to understand and wrap our head around complexity. Everything gets more and more complex. It's not easier to take into account all of humans and all of life on Earth. It's much easier to take into account just all the people in the United States or the people in my neighborhood, but eventually we actually earn a lot from growing. I'll also just say that the process of development isn't a straightforward thing. There's a little bit 1 step forward, 2 steps back or something like that. But, eventually we are hoping that as we grow and we realize this isn't really working for me anymore, and then we open up to new learning, we find a better way of being, a more adequate way of being, and then we integrate that into ourselves. And then eventually that's not going to be adequate, and then we're going to keep on going. So this is an iterative, oscillating, not very straightforward process. It's more like a spiral than it is like a straight line. So why do we want to grow as individuals? Why is this important? So the coolest thing about growing, about individual as a way of dealing with the political democratic crisis that we're in, is that we're totally in control of our own self. We don't actually need anyone else to change. We can change our own self whenever we want. Our own personal development kind of improves our experience of life. As we're able to take in more things and grow more, as everyone who's done this kind of work says, oh, wow, I like this better. So it's a cool experience. And it's hard. It means we have to face our own imperfections. We have to realize, shit, this isn't adequate. This isn't good enough. And that's hard to recognize that the way I'm looking at things isn't really doing the trick anymore. The other challenge of trying to deal with our political democratic issues with individual growth is that we can't change anyone else. I can change, I can grow, you can change, you can grow, but other people might not come along with you. And that means that your system around you, your family, your friends, your community, they may kind of want you to stay where you are. It can be threatening to see you grow. But it also, as you grow, or as any of us grow as an individual, we get to become a model of hey, this is actually a little cooler. And hopefully that might bring people along. And in fact, that's the only way you can change someone, is to accept them as they are and show them that there might be a cooler way, and they can catch up when they want. So I want to also say something that was someone taught me a couple years ago that was really interesting. I thought, it can't hurt to just listen to another person's perspective. But if you actually do listen to someone and engage with them, you will change. It will change your mind. And this gets captured in a wonderful quote by Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. And I'll just name that we started with a quote from Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. Um, the quote, one of my favorites, is Oliver Holmes said, "I would not give a fig for the simplicity on this side of complexity, but I would give my life for the simplicity on the far side of complexity." And that's, how we got here, because we've basically started with this question of like, we want simplicity, but we actually have to face the complexity of the world. And as we get to the end of this whole series, hopefully we'll be able to find the simplicity that exists on the far side of complexity. But the quote I want to share with you right now about the danger of opening up our minds and growing is this: "A man's mind is stretched by a new idea or sensation and never shrinks back to its former dimensions." So here's the thing. Once you start taking in that there's more to the world than what you might imagine, your brain's going to change and grow, and you'll feel the absence of that if you decide to retreat back to trying to forget things. So individual development is no joke. It's really important. There's a lot of us that are going to have to grow up. I'm not exactly sure how we'll do it, but I'm going to be taking you on a series of video/essays to talk about this. And so this next part of the series, I'm going to cover the following. We're going to be talking about brain science. I'm going to talk about why it is inherently hard, why we prefer simplicity over complexity, why we prefer us over them, and maybe give ourselves a little bit of forgiveness for the fact that that's not easy to do. Then we're going to talk about the ethics of ambiguity. Simone de Beauvoir's philosophy will help us understand how we can live in ambiguity and the different choices that we get to make, and what she calls the hierarchy of freedom. I then will take us through just some basic concepts of like personal development and like how does that work and what are the stages of development? How can we understand what's going on around? I'm going to talk about self-awareness, and that's going to include a conversation about authentic self-expression, knowing that you matter, figuring out what your values are and what's meaningful to you, not just discovering it, but then also sharing it with others. And I'm also going to talk about facing our own shadows. What does it mean to be humble, to have humility, and how do we heal and have compassion for ourselves as we realize that, not all of the things we've done in this world are the way in integrity with who we want to be. Then I'm going to talk about some skills. I'm going to talk about some thinking and sense-making skills. How can we think more like a scientist? How can we, improve our approach to understanding things around us and making sense of the world? And then finally, I'll wrap us around with some communication skills and differentiating between self and other, speaking up for ourselves, and the practice of deep listening. So here's the deal. We have to embrace our interdependence, and we're going to have to embrace the fact that life is inherently ambiguous and nuanced and complex. So coming up next, why that is a freaking hard thing to do. Thank you for listening and have a great day.